Welcome, everyone. Good evening, good morning, depending on where you are. If you are able to turn on your camera, it would be wonderful so we can all see each other and feel like we're together in a traditional class. This class today is part of Folzman here at Drisha. It's the first session of AI, halachic decision making, and Torah education with Rabbi Jonathan Ziering. Rabbi Jonathan Ziering is a Rosh Yeshiva at Yeshivat Migdal HaTorah in Modi'in. Rabbi Ziering previously served as Sgan Rosh Kolel of the Yeshiva University at Torah Mitzion, Beit Midrash Zichron Dov, and also worked as Beit Midrash Beit Avraham Yosef in Toronto. Rabbi Ziering is the author of the recently released Torah in a Connected World, a halachic perspective on communication technology and social media from Magid Press. Just a few words about today's this session. It explores how new technologies force us to ask how Torah can respond to or shape the development of such changes. Artificial intelligence, especially generative AI, has raised many new questions, both moral and practical, and a language must be found to frame these issues religiously. In this course, throughout this session, we will focus on how AI changes the way we think about halachic decision making and the goals of education, especially when AI can seemingly do many of the things previously done by human beings. And with that, I'll turn this to you, Rabbi Ziering.
Well, thank you very much, Evie. It's good to see everyone again. Um, so so yeah, I'm very excited about this course, both the one we're doing now in the fall and the one that we'll be doing just in a few weeks for the winter's month. Um, I want just a few words of introduction before we get into today's specific topic. One of the things that's really driven me over the last few years is exploring ways in which halacha intersects with technology. That was the topic of my book that came out a few months ago, where I explored issues in communication technology and social media. And I've been thinking a lot about artificial intelligence recently. And if you'll indulge me, I want to sort of just set out my overall thesis of the world, or view of the world, which is why I'm interested in these types of topics. Rabbi Soloveitchik has a really fascinating piece where he was asked, he said, what if he could write a new Ani Maamin, right, another article of faith. Um, he said the 14th Ani Maamin that he would write would be the belief that the Torah is always relevant. At some level, he notes that that's implicit in some of the other doctrines that the Rambam outlines, the Torah being eternal and the like. But it's worth noting specifically this notion that no matter what changes, the Torah is always relevant. Um, and because of that, I think it's important to really explore what that means, because um, there are two very different ways in which you can think that Torah is relevant when it comes to new technologies. And this was really driven home to me when I was reading an excellent book out of Oxford University Press called Future Morality, which is a collection of 20 some odd essays, in which the introductory thesis is as follows. In the book, they deal with both cutting edge technology, but also futuristic technology, right? Technology that seems to be like it might soon exist, might one day exist, but we're not sure. And the editor of the book asks, why is it that ethicists should be dealing with technologies that don't even exist yet? And what he said, I think is very powerful. And he said, listen, there's at least a twofold answer. One is that ethicists have to be responsive to any questions that are raised that deal with how you should act in this world. And the pace at which technology changes makes it such that if you aren't thinking about a technology before it exists, you will not have time to respond when it exists. That's point one. More importantly, is that the notion that ethics can be responsive to new technology, while true and important, is myopic in its scope. Because if ethics has something to say about modern technologies, it's not just that ethics can say something, the technology exists, and now we tell you how you use it. If ethics is really important, so then it should be involved in how and how we develop technology, what technologies we choose to pursue, how we pursue them, how much funding we give to them. Meaning, if ethics is really important, then the reason you need to think about questions that don't yet exist is because they should shape what things we decide should come into existence. And the example I like giving is, if anyone's familiar, several presidents at this point have done this. Have convened what has become known as the President's Council of Bioethics, in which the president gets together thought leaders, philosophers, and scientists, and religious leaders to explore thorny ethical questions. So this was done when the White House was trying to determine the contours of funding for stem cell technology, where he called together the president called together a council on bioethics, and you can still find the documents that were written, the essays that were written as part of that, and you'll find there that there are pieces from scientists, obviously, but from religious leaders, including rabbis. Rabbi Elliot Dorff was one of the people who was called upon to contribute. And to put it very simply, if the president of the United States or multiple presidents of the United States who are not Jews, are definitely not committed Jews, believe that the Torah has something to say about what technologies should be embraced and how they should be funded and how they should be developed and the contours of the future, then those of us who do see the value in Torah and believe in the eternity of Torah, we should have at least as much faith in the Torah. So for me, exploring the implications both of new technologies and imagining what directions these technologies might take, and coming up with frameworks to help think about these technologies, to me is important, not just practically, but also as just a fundamental act of faith. Right? For me, learning about these topics is a declaration that I believe that the Torah can and must be relevant in profound ways, not just in responding to the world, but in shaping the world. Right. So that's why I have a minor obsession with these topics. So that's my general introduction to all these types of topics. And for the last I'm sorry, for the last few years, I've really been thinking about artificial intelligence because it's been in the news so much. So much is being written, not just on the tech side, but tech leaders, philosophers, religious leaders have really been very, very active over the last few years, trying to figure out what are the ethical questions that are raised by the very impressive technologies that are coming out that are broadly referred to as artificial intelligence or machine learning, and the like. And the distinctions are important, but we won't get too much into them, and not, at least not right now, because for what we're going to do today, the details are not as relevant. But everyone understands that this is very, very powerful technology, and therefore it's really important to think about what this will do to the world. So what we're going to do in the next 3 classes is explore a very small part of this, and that is the effect of artificial intelligence, and specifically generative artificial intelligence, on how we think about education and how we think about halachic decision making. Today we'll deal with education. The next 2 weeks we'll deal with halachic decision making. So with that, we'll move to this, and then I'm going to throw out some questions, see some initial thoughts, and then we'll see some sources. So as I'm sure people have seen, know, since ChatGPT went public, this has been, besides for just its popularity, it has really changed a lot about the way we think about education. I've seen this a lot amongst my students. The second that ChatGPT went public, it suddenly became much harder for us when we ask our students for a weekly Dvar Torah for our yeshiva email. Because while some students are still excited to show their creativity and their newfound skills in yeshiva, other people turned to ChatGPT and said, "Write me a 500-word Dvar Torah on Parshat whatever." And at the beginning, it was quite funny, right? The things that you would get, as you know, it can sound compelling, but it can also hallucinate. So at some point, when my students were doing this, I said, "Look, here's the problem with using ChatGPT," and I said, "Let's ask it a question." And I asked it, why do we say Maoz Tzur at the Seder? Right, which obviously we don't. We will be saying Maoz Tzur in a few weeks on Hanukkah. At the Seder, as far as I know, there is no such custom, but that didn't matter to ChatGPT. It very quickly wrote me an essay quoting sources that obviously don't exist about why you should say Maoz Tzur at the Seder. Now, it's also good at other things. So it was Parshat Korach, and we asked ChatGPT, can you rewrite Parshat Korach from the vantage point of God, but write it as a Twitter rant in the voice of Bernie Sanders? That was the experiment that we did, and it was very enjoyable. Right, it gives a very different perspective on on the parsha, but obviously, it's really changed things. It makes it that things that used to take a lot of time now, if you know what you're doing with ChatGPT, so yes, you can have something which is ridiculous, but if you know what you're doing, it can actually speed up the process very, very quickly. And if you actually feed it good ideas and you can edit it a little bit, it can help you write an essay that used to take hours and instead it'll take minutes. And you can find sources, admittedly, sources that don't exist, but also sources that do exist. But not just find them, but have them written. It will incorporate analysis. My students routinely use it for translation. I forget if I did it on this source sheet. I know that on next week's source sheet, I just to sort of I didn't on this one, but in next week's source sheet, just to show you the power of ChatGPT, some of the translations are taken straight from ChatGPT, and you'll see they're quite good. Sometimes you have to change a word here or there, but what used to take me, half an hour to translate a long text now takes just seconds. And this really forces us to ask, well, what does this tell us about education? Because education has a lot of goals, but a lot of things that I used to be able to say to my students, or my teachers said to me, I can't say anymore, right? When my teachers would say to me things as easy like, no one's going to write that essay for you. Well, that's not true anymore. Someone very much will write that essay for you. And it might even be good. And undeniably, within the next few years, it will get better and better at doing that. So we need to go back to first principles and say, okay, in a world in which information is not just cheap, but seemingly new material, which incorporates thoughtful ideas that can be, whatever it is that's being fed into ChatGPT or whatever other, whatever else you're using. Well, what are we trying to accomplish? Because some of the things that we used to expect that human beings would have to do, and therefore we had to educate towards it. Now, well, we don't, or we barely do. So for me as an educator, and just in general for Jews, where education is just so central, we really need to think, like, what is our goal in Torah? And what does the existence of tools as powerful as ChatGPT and whatever else it'll be? I mean, it's not just this. It's even things that we used to think you really needed a human being for. At one of our professional development days, one of my colleagues created a basic using technology that's found on Khan Academy, a basic chavruta with a chatbot, right? And it actually sort of works, right? You can have a chavruta with a chatbot. So how do we think about, right? What do we think about this? So that's the question I want to deal with tonight. And before I look at sources, I want to throw it out to you, right? What is the purpose, right? We know that Torah learning is really important to us, but why, right? What are our goals? If we list our goals in education, what are they? Which ones of them stay the same no matter what changes the world, and which of them do we have to rethink? Right, that's really the goal that I want to do tonight. So, what do you think? Right, why is learning important? What does it mean to learn Torah? And how might technologies like ChatGPT and other generative artificial intelligence, how might that change what we're trying to do in education? Okay, so we have
I
no
think
takers
it's.
here. Oh, yep.
I was just going to say, I think it could definitely go both ways. I think that if your goal is to, learn better, and if ChatGPT is giving you accurate answers, which obviously is frequently not the case, you'd have to at least be well enough educated to know when it's, just faking you out with fake answers. It could really help. It could help with like translation kind of things like that, and also with quick lookups. What does whoever say about this? On the other hand, if the purpose is to create community and get closer to and support each other in your learning in your Yiddishkeit, I don't know if ChatGPT is going to do that.
Okay, so Miriam says two things, right? One is that there are clearly parts of learning, right, which are how shall we say, very result oriented, right? Just like practical. I need to know X. I need to know Y. And to the extent that we're okay looking up something in I don't know, an easy summary book, or Googling it, or looking on, I don't know, Halachapedia, or whatever the case may be. So if ChatGPT can write something for me, if Bing AI, which is actually pretty good on these things, can write, can give me a summary of what I need to do. So obviously that's great. But to the extent that that learning isn't just about learning, but it's about the people we connect to and the like, that can't change, right? And we're still going to need to find ways to learn. Good. I agree with both of those things. Other ideas before I say any of my own thoughts. What else? Right? What else is our goal in learning? Right. So we have practical knowledge and we have community building. Yeah. Catherine, is that? Yeah.
Is there I think there's an essential difference between learning and wisdom, right? I'm a retired professor, and I never wanted my students to learn. I wanted my students to gain enough knowledge that they could synthesize new knowledge, solve problems that they'd not encountered before. And isn't that part of the goal? And AI does not have the capability yet of achieving wisdom. It can achieve learning. It can put lots of sources together, well or not so well, but it cannot think a new thought.
Okay, so Catherine, actually, I think you said something very important, but I actually think you said two very important things, right? One is that there's a difference between, let's say, knowledge of facts, right, and the creation of, let's call it, I don't know, insight, or wisdom, as you call it. That's one. But in the first half of what you said, you actually said something else, which is not just, I mean, I think this is important. It's not just that AI can't prove, we can't, or at least not yet, which we can talk about, that maybe at some point it will. But the other is that Catherine thought it was important for her students to be able to synthesize knowledge and themselves be wise. And even if we got to the point where artificial intelligence reached sentience and could think for itself, so maybe we would accomplish half of this goal, right? But we wouldn't the other, meaning, fine, it would be thinking creatively and it might have wisdom. Maybe I'm skeptical this is true, but if you look at techno optimists, they will say this will happen soon or at least eventually. Techno pessimists will say it will never happen because there's something unique about humanity. I'm personally more on the human beings are probably unique in some way. But it still won't make it, at least not yet, that we, right, that the fact that the AI can do it, that we will have achieved wisdom, because there's something about the process itself, right? And that's very important, right? That's very important. So we have a few things here, right? So now there's facts, right? There's fact gathering, there's wisdom, we have community building, and then the intrinsic importance of people becoming wise, right? Not just the production of wisdom and insight, but the importance of people being wise, right? So what we already see is that there are certain things that it can do and certain things that it can't do. Okay. Anyone else want to? Anne, right? Okay, Anne, yeah, go.
And I think we're fudging something a little bit. I think there's a space between, knowing facts and wisdom. I think AI can put ideas together, which may or may not be wisdom. I just think we're fudging that. I wanted to raise that.
Okay, good. So I think that's important, right? Anne notes that this is not quite as binary, right? There's facts, then there's the synthesis of facts, which is a step up from mere data, but it is a step up, and AI might be able to synthesize it. In fact, it sort of does. Whether it understands it is a different story, but it can do that. And then there's like something else, right? And I agree with you. And
it's bringing ideas and different sources and different points of view together and crafting wholes. That's something really remarkable. But there's
right,
also
and then what's the next thing, right?
Well,
there's still something else. So what is it? What word would you give it?
I don't know. There's a number of other things. I mean, there's something.
Okay, good. So
there's something that I get in learning Torah, which is awe at what I'm reading, something inspirational, something that I connection to the text, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's that. And then there's something else, which may be wisdom. I don't know.
I really like that you invite awe. I really like that you invite awe. I'll tell you why. There was a book. Every so often I read a book that like really, really throws me and makes me think. So a few months ago, I read an excellent book called Awe by a psychologist, I think on the West Coast, named Dr. Keltner, I think. It's an excellent book. And it's simply about the effect of awe, the 6 different categories of things that cause awe in people, and what it actually does to your mind and how it actually changes you. Right? They've done all types of fascinating experiments where simply being exposed to things that make you feel awe, like nature, make you better at math. Right? Like looking at nature for a few minutes, make you, they did certain tests, make people score like 50% better on math tests, right? Because awe actually like warps, like changes our brain. It opens it up to think in different ways. And interestingly, one of the things that people feel awe, I mean, this shouldn't surprise any of us, is the encounter with religion, right? Religion is one of those things that does that. And honestly, when I was reading that book, it struck me how many psukim, how many verses in Tehillim really talk about this, right? And the pasuk says, right, Torah Hashem tmima mishivat nafesh, right? The Torah of God is perfect, and it gives us tranquility. But then we say, right, that it's mahkim ad peti. It makes the people who are not intelligent smarter, and that's actually true, right? What we've discovered is that being in contact with things that are awesome actually makes us smarter. It's not just like, it's not a metaphor. It actually, we have data that this is true. So I think awe is great, right? Is great. Okay, I see we have another question from Noah. Noah it's good to see you. How are you, Noah?
I'll turn the camera on then. So I'm doing good. I'm glad to be part of this class. At least within the context of generative AI, at least as my little understanding of, get it. The effect of when it provides information, let's say even correct information in discussing Torah, it's not it doesn't create a change in and of itself. It doesn't have the ability to weigh its or choose kind of the method in which it works to achieve its goal. So and teacher and educator is able to ascertain and the effect of what it is that they're trying to say and what they're trying to give over. But the AI is just working to fulfill a goal. And so,
okay,
yeah.
so Noah adds, and this is not from the perspective of the learner, but the fact that the process of Torah, definitional in many respects, is the fact that there's like there's a meeting between teacher and student, or parent and child, or chavrutot, or friends, or whatever, that there is, and that part of Torah education is there's somebody who's trying to do something, which and that intentionality maybe is important. And AI, even if it can put together ideas, doesn't have that intentionality. I like that. That's good, right? I think it's true. I mean, I hope when you were in yeshiva that we did that. But yeah, I agree with all these things. And okay, what I want to do is try to put this together. Oh, okay. Mr. Geller, because I see Anne's first name, but I don't know your name. Okay. What's your first name? Go. I see you raising your hand. But...
Yeah, my name is David. I just wanted to raise one other.
Hello, David.
I'll try to be, really brief, which is one that comes up frequently is fear of de-skilling, that we will lose skills because of this technology. The classic example of this in the West is Socrates saying that literacy will make us, we will lose our ability to memorize, which absolutely happened. Or we're not reciting.
I am so glad. I'm so glad you quoted that. You'll see that is actually one of my last sources. But yes, I agree with you. Right? Yes.
So I'm just raising it as an issue. I actually would argue in favor, in most cases, of de-skilling. That's how we've progressed, by handing cognitive tasks to tools that can handle them. Everything from an abacus to calculators and computers. In general, I think that's really helpful for us. I have no opinion, however, about whether it depends on the goals of learning Torah, whether we want to see that sort of de-skilling. And
perfect. So David highlights that at some level the question we have to ask is, do we want to de-skill something? We'll have to see what that is. Right. The more modern example is that people always like to use is the fact that we've lost in our brains the ability to navigate. Right. We're so dependent on whatever you're using, GPS or Waze, especially, where like, even the roads I take every day, like you put in Waze and just it does things I can't do because it knows how much traffic there is and it can it can predict it. And like if it was really bad, right? I discovered this the beginning of the war. For a little while, Waze shut down because it was they didn't want Hamas to be able to know where there were traffic jams and aim rockets at the traffic jams. And this was a panic-inducing thing for Israelis because Israelis live on Waze, right? And they don't know what to do. I think Waze actually worked, but only as a basic GPS, none of the predictive stuff. So people didn't know how much traffic there were. They didn't know how to take, right? And this was really hard for people. And to figure out whether de-skilling is something that will affect Torah, well, we got to figure out what are the goals of Torah. Okay, this was great. I don't always get feedback at the beginning, but this was amazing. So this is going to help us move through the sources, I think, a little bit quicker. So I'm going to start by following a little bit of analysis by Rabbi Lamb. Rabbi Lamb has an article that was published in 2003, where he basically explored not AI, but a different question, which was if we develop the ability to upload information straight into our brain, would we do that? Would we be missing something in Talmud Torah? And in his article, he called it knowing versus learning, which takes precedence. This was republished in a book called Wisdom from All My Teachers. And he frames the question, I'll give you his basic, but he basically, I mean, you can look at it really in three. He says, the question is, which is more important, Torah study or Torah knowledge? Right? Now that's more extreme than AI because we're actually, in a certain way, right? We're actually putting things in our brain. But the truth is that AI raises the same question because information is cheap. Okay, maybe it's not in our brain, but it's at our fingertips within 5 seconds. Okay, right? So it's a similar question. And he says clearly Torah study, limud, is exceedingly important, and so is Torah knowledge, yidiyah. But is there more importance to learning as a process or to knowing as a passive achievement? If Torah knowledge is the totality and ultimate aim of Torah, then it might be possible sometimes in the future to fulfill one's obligation of Torah study by purchasing a microchip that contains all 400 books of responsa from the Bar-Ilan CD-ROM. At this point, it's not a CD-ROM, and there aren't only 400 books, but the question is the same. There are now thousands and thousands of books, and it is definitely not on a CD. I don't think my computer has a CD drive. And implanting it in one's brain, one would have Torah knowledge. What more would one need? There are other shortcuts that technology might invent by which one could achieve a great deal of knowledge without spending terribly much energy in acquiring that knowledge. So the question is, which will it be, right? Lamb frames it and he says, listen, basically the question is the process of learning important or just the result, right? And if the result is just knowledge, well, then maybe technology, whether it be a chip in your brain or even just information, generative AI that, again, doesn't put it in your brain, but gives it to you at your fingertips, that might, right, if that's the goal, so we can change our expectations, the easier it becomes to access information. And if you look at the main two psukim that are often quoted, I gave it to you in 1 and 2, at some level, you get different implications, right? In number 1, you get, which we read in Shema, Vishinantem levanecha, you shall teach your children, Vidibarta bam, b'shivtecha b'veitecha, v'lechtecha v'derech, v'shach l'chav kumecha. Right? Now, what does that mean? So on the one hand, it says you shall teach them and speak in it, which implies that the process is important. But there also seems to be a set idea of knowledge. This is what you teach them. And as we'll see, some view that at least partially as result oriented. On the other hand, the pasuk at the beginning of Yoshua tells us, "Lo yamush sefer haTorah hazeh mipicha, v'yigita bo yomam v'layla, liman tishmor la'asot k'chol ha'katuv bo, ki az tatzlech et derechecha v'az taskil." The Torah shall not cease from your lips; you shall recite it, you shall dwell in it, ponder it, day and night, so that you'll be able to keep the Torah. Now, there are two things going on here. On the one hand, you're supposed to think about it day and night, which implies that the process itself is important because you're just doing it all the time, regardless of how much you know. On the other hand, there is a goal, at least some goal, which is that you should, right, that it should practically help you know what to do, which obviously, you could Google it. Okay, great. Right, so I just noted that in the verse that we have in Yoshua, on the one hand, it says you shall dwell in it day and night, which implies to some extent that simply the process of being involved is important. On the other hand, there is a goal, which is it helps you act, right? It helps you keep the Torah, which of course, if you could Google it, maybe that is, so right, the Gemara there deals with how much you have to learn daily, and it has different positions. whether you have to learn one chapter or you learn constantly. And then the Gemara even tells a story. We don't have so much time, so I'll say it a little bit outside. But Ben Dama, the son of Rabbi Ishmael, his sister, asked Rabbi Ishmael, and he's a little bit arrogant, and he says, "Listen, I know all of the Torah. I know everything. So can I stop learning Torah and go and learn something else? Go and learn Greek knowledge?" And his uncle responds to him, and he said, "Listen, I have a very simple solution for you. Yoshua says, Vaygita bo yomam v'layla, you should learn day and night. So find time which is not day and which is not night. And when you find the time which is not day and not night, so then you can learn other things." Now, the thrust of this sugya, right, of this piece of Gemara, whether you go on the minimalist view that you have to learn only a little bit every day, or you go on the maximalist one that you have at the end, clearly the process of learning is intrinsically important, right? It's telling you every day, it doesn't matter how much you know, you have to either learn a little bit or you have to learn a lot, but every day you should be studying Torah, right? So the process is clearly important, regardless of how much you know. On the other hand, if you look at the Gemara in number 5, the Gemara there says that Tanu Rabbanan v'shinnantem. It says that the Torah should be sharp. What does that mean, sharp? Right? The word shinun can mean to learn, to study, but it could also mean lishanein, to make something sharp. So it says, "Shiyu divrei Torah mechudadim leficha, shem yishalach lecha adam davar al tigamgem." So if people ask you something, you don't have to stutter. V'tomar lo, and then tell them, "Ela emer lo miyad, she'emar emor lachachma achoti at." As it says, you should call wisdom your sister, right? You should be familiar with wisdom like it's a member of your family. And it says, tie them to your fingers, write them on the board of your heart, etc. So here, the Talmud focuses not just on how much you study, but that you should know Torah. And from here, many commentaries have, and I'm going to have to skip some, but many commentaries following the Ran in Nedarim in number 6, but this was made famous by the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, by Shneir Zalman of Liadi in his Shulchan Aruch Harav, which I gave you in number 9. They posit that there are 2 separate mitzvot in Talmud Torah. There's a mitzvah to study intrinsically, and then there is a mitzvah to know a certain basic body of knowledge. They argue of how much that is, but it's the core of Torah knowledge. Right, the Shulchan Aruch Harav is actually quite expansive. For him, it's Tanakh and Mishnah and Talmud Bavli and Talmud Yerushalmi and Midrash. But there's a separate mitzvah to know Torah. And if you look at some other sources, right, this becomes evident. If you look in number 10 in Kohelet Rabbah, the Midrash there says something amazing. It says, "L'tovato adam lomei Torah v'shocheach." It's for man's benefit that he studies Torah and forgets it. She'ilu haya adam lomei Torah v'lo shecha. If someone would study and not forget, haya mitasek b'Torah shtayim shalosh shanim. So you learn all of Torah in 2 or 3 years. This is quite ambitious, but okay, fine. I've been learning for more than 2 or 3 years, as I think everybody else on this call, on this meeting has, and I don't think we've finished it, but okay. But it imagines that someone would knock it off in 2 years, and he would do other things. He'd work, and he wouldn't bother studying Torah. But because people learn and forget, so you never stop learning. Right, so the Midrash here in Kohelet Rabbah says something amazing. He says if the only goal was knowing Torah, so then you might theoretically reach that goal and be done. So God introduces forgetfulness into the world in order to ensure that we are constantly involved in the study of Torah. The Midrash in Vayikra Rabbah in number 11 gives a parable of a worker who's hired to fill a basket that's filled with holes. And it says that the foolish workers don't want to do it because they say, what's the point in filling up a basket that's just going to be emptied? And the wise person says, it doesn't matter. I'm being paid to do this job. So fine, so it'll empty and then I'll fill it again. But I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And therefore, the same is true of Torah. And again, many people from, I gave you a list here, the Shulchan Aruch Harav, the Birkei Yosef, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter in Or Yisrael, Rabbi Yosef Zevin in Shlomo Yosef Zevin in L'Or HaTorah, Rabbi Asher Weiss in Minchat Asher, all note that what you see from this is that there's at least two ways to think about Torah. There's a mitzvah to learn, to study, to be involved, which is independent of whether you already know Torah. And then there's a second goal, which is to know Torah. And Reb Zevin, you can look in his piece, notes that at least in some of the medieval counts of mitzvot, there are separate mitzvot that point to this. So, for example, the Yereim writes that counts 3 mitzvot: that you should study Torah, that you should study, teach, keep, and perform Torah, that you should teach 4 actually, that you should teach yourself, and that you should teach your children. Right? He has like all types of mitzvot. Torah has many, many, many goals. And sometimes, if you look at 12 and 13, we refer to this as amelut b'Torah, that it's not just enough to study Torah, but the effort is important. Right? Rashi cites a midrash from the Sifra that the Torah says, "In bechokotai telechu," if you go in my ways, you follow my laws. And the midrash asks, well, what is that? We already said the second half of the verse is that mitzvotai tishmaru, that you should keep the mitzvot. So what does it mean to walk in God's statutes and ordinances if you already are keeping the mitzvot? So the midrash answers, Hamani mekayim im bechukotai telefu, shetihu amelim b'Torah, that you should be, you should toil in Torah, you should be laborious in Torah. Which again focuses not just that you should learn, but there's a process. The effort itself is important. Now, for Rabbi Lam, this is enough, right? This answers his question, right? Rabbi Lam says the fundamental question you need to figure out is, if there's a benefit to the process, to the effort, to learning Torah and struggling in Torah and being involved in Torah, then it's clear that no amount of technology that's going to make it easier for you to access information, even access good analysis, doesn't matter. None of that matters. Because at the end of the day, what matters is that you are studying, you are working hard. And everything else, it may be nice. Maybe it can shortcut the other goal, which is knowing Torah, but it can never replace the benefit of being involved in Torah. Right? And if you look at 14, Rabbi Lam thinks that this distinction is not just important in Talmud Torah, but it's fundamental to, for him, the difference between Jewish thought and Greek thought. I mean, he writes Judaism versus the Greeks. The question has certain clear philosophic underpinnings. It goes back to the days when Judaism was involved in a struggle with Hellenism and the teachings of Greek civilization. The Jewish struggle with the Greeks was not only a physical battle. We won that battle, so we celebrate Hanukkah. But it was also a conflict in the world of ideas and values, and that has many consequences. Scholars tell us that Plato, whose writings are the origin of so much of Western philosophical thought throughout the ages, poses an ontological question. That is, a question about the very nature of reality. He said that there was a difference between being and becoming. Becoming means development, constant growth, progress. Being means the aim, the end result. Greek thought, starting with Plato, said that being trumps becoming. Being is the ideal, and becoming is just the means towards achieving that ideal. The end is the more important. The word end in English, like the word tachlit in Hebrew, has 2 meanings. It means the final item or part, and also means the purpose, as in means and ends. Since the purpose is greater than what it leads to, than what leads to it, being takes precedence over becoming. Accordingly, the Greeks believe that knowledge is the ultimate goal because it is a state of being. I mean, Rabbi Lam goes on in this direction. He says, right, Jewish thought doesn't believe this. He proves this from Rambam. But if you skip down the next paragraph, I'll just show you his piece from the Kotzker Rebbe. He writes that the Talmud states, if someone tells you I struggled but I did not reach my goal, do not believe it. Rabbi Nachum Mendel of Kotz comments, the struggle itself is already an achievement of the goal. Even if one has not achieved what he wanted, as long as he struggles, he has won. The final product is secondary. We must not believe the one who says I did not reach my goal because he does not realize that the goal is secondary. Rather, I struggled and succeeded. Believe him. We must believe that the attempt to achieve is what the Torah and the moral life are all about. Right? So Rabbi Lam says the answer to our question is very simple, is that technology can only ever get us to certain goals, right? It can help us shortcut to knowing things, to knowing what to do. But the second you realize that the process itself is important, that the effort is important, nothing is ever going to be able to replace the experience of doing it yourself. And he quotes the story, and I gave it to you in 15, but I'll say it outside, that, and don't ask me to explain this, but apparently among Kabbalists, there was a thing that people would get chavruto, study partners with angels. These angels were known as Magidim. Again, do not ask me what this means. I don't know. Rabbi Yosef Karo, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, has an entire book called Magid Mesharim, which records his study sessions with his angelic chavrusa. The Vilna Gaon was, according to his students, approached often by angels, because apparently even the angels wanted to study with the Vilna Gaon. But as Rav Chaim Volozhin tells about his teacher, he always turned them away. And he said, I don't want it. I don't want anything from angels. And I don't care the quality of what they're going to give me. I want to go through the process myself. Right? And that's one of the stories that Rabbi Lam quotes to prove his point. However, I will be honest that I think at some level that's true. Right? I think this partially answers the question, because it's true that if you have a practical halachic question, can you look it up on Google? Yes. Can you have, Bing AI write you a little answer? Yes. Can you have ChatGPT write you a little essay? Sure. If you needed Dvar Torah to say at your Shabbat meal, can ChatGPT give you something that is passable? Probably, right? Maybe weird. You have to correct for that. Fine. Rabbi Lam is definitely right that the more we understand that the process is important, the more that we're going to say that you're still missing something. But I don't think that's enough. And several people said this in the first half of the class, but I think you're definitely right. And where this really hit me was where I was reading a book. I don't know if anyone's ever read this book, Moonwalking with Einstein. But Joshua Foer, who is also known for having founded Sfaria, before that, he became well known because he was the 2006 U.S. memory champion. And he writes a book about his experience becoming the memory champion. And he says that he did a deep dive into history of, as I think it was David who mentioned, the Greeks talked a lot about how important it was to memorize and why you shouldn't give up memory. And the reason that they thought that was important, and you didn't want to de-skill on that point, was they write as follows. He quotes this: the sheer volume of anecdotes about extraordinary memories in the classical world is itself telling. Seneca the Elder could repeat 2,000 names in the order they'd been given to him. St. Augustine tells of a friend, Simplicius, who could recite Virgil by heart backward. That he could recite it forward seems to have been unremarkable. A strong memory was seen as the greatest virtue since it represented the internalization of a universe of external knowledge. Progressive education reform has accomplished many things. It has made school a lot more pleasant and a lot more interesting, but it's also brought with it costs for us as individuals and as citizens. Memory is how we transmit virtues and values and partake of a shared culture. Of course, the goal of education is not merely to cram a bunch of facts into students' heads. It's to lead them to understand those facts. Nobody would agree with that more than Raymond Matthews. I want thinkers, not just people who can repeat what I tell them, he says. But even if facts don't by themselves lead to understanding, you can't have understanding without facts. And crucially, the more you know, the easier it is to know more. Memory is like a spider web that catches new information. The more it catches, the bigger it grows. And the bigger it grows, the more it catches. And what he captures here from classical thought is really what a lot of people said in different ways. So let's see if I remember who said what. I think it was Catherine who said, right, that when she was a professor, right, she wanted her students to be able to be wise, right? We noted she said two things. One is that maybe AI can't yet be wise, but the second thing is you want people who are wise, right? I think it was, we have to see everyone on it. Was it Miriam? That part of it is we want to build community, right? We also, right? Anne said part of it is we want to feel awe, and which I mentioned opens you up to religious experience. Another thing I would add is identity, right? I said to I would pose it very simply. I said, listen, maybe some of us could forgive somebody who doesn't know all of the Talmud by heart, and when they need to know some complex, law in sacrificial law, looks it up. That's one thing. But I think we could all agree that if you had somebody who needed to ask ChatGPT, even if they would get the right answer, what is Pesach? What is Passover? Right? Or what are the 10 commandments? Or what did God create on day one? Right? We would say, even if they could get the answer in 5 seconds, we recognize you're lacking something in terms of your Jewish identity. You're lacking something in terms of your connection to the Jewish community. You can't build knowledge because you don't even have basics. You can't think Jewishly about the world because it isn't part of you. Right? What the ancient thinkers realized is that memory is actually important, right? And this comes back to David's point. I would argue that, completely de-skilling people on memory completely is a problem because there are degrees. But if we literally didn't know anything, we asked ChatGPT for everything, right? And you didn't know what Pesach was, and you didn't know what Shabbat was, and you didn't know what God created, and you didn't know the 10 commandments, and you didn't know basic words and phrases. And when someone said, I don't know, basic Jewish phrases, Mazal Tov, it didn't resonate with you, right? You are missing something in terms of your identity as an individual. You're missing something in terms of your membership in the community. You're missing, as Anne said, the ability to be inspired and just be wowed by God's word because, you're not exposed to it. It's something that you use when you need it, but it's not part of who you are. As Catherine said, you don't have people who are wise. Right? And as she correctly said, you tell your students you need to know certain things because knowledge builds on itself. I like how Faur puts it, that memory is a spider web that catches new information. The more it catches, the bigger it grows. The bigger it grows, the more it catches. But there's a certain amount you need to internalize because it needs to be part of you. Right? It needs to be part of you. And if you look just at the last source I gave you, the Ritva is commenting on why in the Talmudic period, the Talmud said it was forbidden to write down the oral law. Right? In an ideal world, the oral law is oral and memorized. And the Ritva just says, when they aren't written, you feel responsible, and this comes back to Noah's point, to teach others, right? If it's not written down, then that gives responsibility. Everyone feels responsible to learn it, to teach it, to connect. But if it's written down, once it's written down, there's nobody there to take responsibility for it, right? And I see that Miriam asked a question, but I just want to summarize so I don't really go over time, and then I'll take Miriam's question, then I'll stick around for questions because I know we lost a little bit because of internet problems. But I totally agree at some level with Rabbi Lamb that to the extent that one of the goals of Talmud Torah is to know things, technology of all sorts can help with that. to the extent that the process is important, that's never going to change. But what I think isn't talked about enough is what we talked about it for the first 20 minutes of our class when we were just brainstorming, was that knowing things is important. It makes us who we are as individuals. It shapes the way we experience the world. It enables us to relate differently to every new piece of information that comes our way. It gives us the ability to be wise. It gives us the ability to connect with people, whether they be colleagues, friends, family, students, teachers. And we forget that, right? We forget that when information is cheap and we come to rely on that. Because sure, maybe it's easier to, like I said, look up some detailed archaic law in sacrificial law. But do any of us want to live in the world where people don't know the basics, right? Where our conversations on Shabbat, because the stories in Chumash are things that we're familiar with and we can talk about and we can build on them. And they're just part of our cultural milieu. We live these stories, we live these facts, we live these holidays, we live this awesomeness, right? That's lost. And I think we have to talk about that more. I think we need to talk about that more, because as technology makes the access of information cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and easier, including analysis, if we don't articulate the fact that we also learn because of it makes us who we are as individuals, as community, it opens us to experience, it opens us to be wise. It helps us process the world in different ways because the information is internal to us, right? Then we're not going to encourage people, right, to continue that struggle. And that's the part that I think people talk about less. But, right, as we saw from the 20 minutes that we started with, we all know it's true. We all know it's true. But we need to somehow tell people that, because we need to make sure that none of us, to go back to David's phrase, de-skill so much that we no longer are able to think as Jews who have been shaped by Torah, right? That's a skill we don't want to give up with all of its manifestations. Okay, that's my piece on what we still need to think about in terms of education. I'll take Miriam's question, and I see people are about to turn on their microphones, which means other questions, which is great, but let me just look at the chat. Right, so Miriam says that all those examples are fact-based. By improving your basic background knowledge, you increase your ability to access the rest. So now part of that is true, but again, I don't think it's only true. It's not just, I think that's partially true, but I would focus on other elements. Part of it is that, yes, is going back to Catherine's point, is that the more information you have, the more you can access and process other things. But if we build on some of the other points, like identity formation, community formation, the experience of awe, the experience of godliness, right? Those things simply aren't, right? That's yet another level. And that can't be replaced. And we need to go back to basics and remind people that part of why we learn things is to have those experiences and shape who we are. And that there's nothing we can do to outsource that. Or if we outsource it, we've lost something about who we are and who we could be. And that I think is just really important, right? We need to articulate that, right? We need to believe it because we need to be ready to respond. And, when a student asks me, why can't I write a Dvar Torah by asking ChatGPT, it'll give people something to talk about on Shabbat. The answer is because don't you want to make the Torah yours? Don't you want that to be part of who you are? I hope the answer is yes, right? They might say, no, I don't care. I want, but ideally, right? Ideally, the answer should be yes. Okay, that's my piece. I know we went a few minutes over, but I will stick around for questions as long as people want. But everyone else should not feel pressure. We will see you next week. The next 2 weeks, we'll be talking about halachic decision-making. I hope to see you there. It's really been great to see old faces and new faces and students from Drisha and elsewhere. That's very special. No, it's very special that you came. I'm just saying that's very special. Okay, any other questions, comments, anything? I see that David wants to say something. So again, you didn't turn on you didn't turn off mute, but no, you're done. No.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I was going to put it in the was leaning forward because I'm typing, but I literally can't see what I'm typing into the.
Okay.
I was wondering so assume that people have basics, the sorts of basics that you were talking about that would establish a sense of Jewish identity and a grounding so that we can advance. However you want to define that, but it's a relatively simple baseline, I think, of what you were proposing. If they then go to AI, to chat AI, to a Gen AI that gets better than it is now, as it will, at answering questions without hallucinating all the time, then does not get over the sort of dichotomy that becomes a tool by which we can intersect.
So here I'm going to say something which might be controversial. I don't think it is, but I would say as follows. I gave in order to make the point, I gave the overly obvious example, right? Where we would all think that there's something lacking if a Jewish person didn't know what Pesach was and Shabbat was, and the Aleph Bet and whatever the Aseret HaDibra. But I would argue that to some level, the same thing is true about a lot more than that, because, the truth is that when you know all of Tanakh, which is a much bigger deal, that also forms your identity in a different way. Like, there's a level of identity that you form when you know the Parsha, but when you see, people taking advantage of the poor, and you have Yeshayahu and Hosea and Amos in all their unique voices in your head, when you're seeing that, your experience is still different, right? And when when you meet someone who converted and you have root in the back of your mind, right? Your experience of what it means to enter Judaism is different. And when you think about, Zionism, and you have Ezra and Nehemiah and Divrei Hayamim, which discuss the period of Shivat Zion, your experience is different. And I would just argue that the more knowledge you have, the more this is true. I don't think it stops at the basics. I think we can all agree on the basics, but I think that what we don't think about is that the truth is that the more you know of Torah, the more that becomes part of the way you see the world. In the same way, Shabbat affects the way I view the world. Look, I see this with my kids. I'm very insistent on my kids. I teach my kids Tanakh very, very young. And all my kids so far have finished Tanakh by the time they're 9. And I see that, the fact that my kids, they breathe Tanakh, it's really, right, it's fascinating. Like, when my son walks around the country, right, he remembers these details better than I do. But we're in Emek Yisrael, just on a hike, and my son insisted we go on this hike in Emek Yisrael because he's like, I want to see the place where X, Y, and Z battles in Tanakh happen, right? Like, history is coming alive before his eyes, right? And while I think it's self-evident for many of us that the basics this is true for, we forget that it's true of the non-basics also, right? That is true of the non-basics also. And yeah, when my kids were diagnosed with celiac, and I studied with them very detailed topic of what exactly are the 5 grains and what can they use now to perform the mitzvot that normally require grain-based things like matzah and the like. My kids who are into botany really appreciated it. And my son goes around and literally he knows what it is. And he'll say, well, of course there's a dispute about the definition of shibolet shu'al, because he points to wild oats and he says, look, oats look different than wheat. Now that's something I didn't know as a kid, but he goes around and sees wild oats, and to him, right, he's thinking already, is this one of the 5 grains? Does that make sense with what I know about Torah, with what I know about Israeli botany, right? And I think at some level we forget that the more you know, the more this is true, right? The way that doctors see the world differently, and lawyers see the world differently, and through the lens of their professions, and the more years they've been immersed in it, the more they see the world through that lens. I don't think it stops. I gave the example of the basics, but no, I think that identity can be formed and grown and deepened, and I don't think there's a point where it stops. I agree that it gets less critical the more you know, right? But I don't think it ever stops. And I see Catherine is nodding, and I think she'd agree as a professor, right? There is something that when you're an expert in the field, you also see the world differently, right? I know I'm going over, but I told you all could leave. So, this is on you that you're still here. But there is that amazing scene in Good Will Hunting, right? Where right, the whatever his name is, the professor, right, says he gets so frustrated because he said his math is so complicated that there are only 5 people in the world who realize how much smarter Will is than him, right? But what he's saying is that, listen, there are only 5 people in the world who know that expertise, and yet their experience of the world is different. So in his world of 5 people plus Will, they have a different conversation, right? So I don't think it ever stops, right? Even if you are the only 5 people in the world who understand it, so you have a different identity, right? I'm not saying that everyone else doesn't, but we all know this, that anything we're experts in, we see the world differently, right? Like, and it's not just Torah. I mean, think about it in everything, right? If I have a student who loves bird watching, right? And yeah, right, Noah, you're laughing, I know, right? But he walks around, right? And yeah, he just experiences the world differently. It's true of anything. And it's not just about the basics. It's about expertise also. And I know it's a high bar, and I'm not saying that, people are not good people if they don't have that expertise. What I am saying is that there is no point in your educational journey, no matter how much of an expert you are, where growing who you are doesn't change the way you view the world. I just don't think there is a point where you say, I've learned everything I need to know, and everything beyond now is just facts. I think everything can shape the way that you view the world. That's my conviction. Maybe I'm wrong, right? Maybe there's a point at which you say, I know everything, but I don't think it's true. I honestly, I just don't think I don't think it's true. Okay, wait, I have another chat here. Anne says, beautifully put, but I think thing we can do and will use Gen AI, text writing machine as a conversational partner. Yes, I think that's true. Now, obviously, yes, now that's an interesting question. Can we use like a generative AI chavruta to make it our own? That I think is true, right? That I think is true. I think that we can use these tools to have a conversation with ourselves. I think that is true. Right, and make it our own. We can definitely think about it as long as we realize that that's part of our goal, right? Is to make it our own, right? Can you have a chavruta with AI? Sure, why not, right? Why not? Will you be losing something of not having human chavruta? I think it depends, right? I think sometimes we want a sounding board, and AI is a good sounding board that won't be judgmental and maybe can, even just, sure, I think that's possible. Okay. Like I said, anyone is free to go. I'm not kicking you out. I will stick around for questions, for conversations.
So,
I'm happy to keep talking, but really, don't feel pressure. The class is officially done. Evie, if you want to say it's officially done,
I
and then
think
let
we do
everyone
probably need to end in a few minutes. But maybe we can take one more question or comment.
Okay, you're the boss. So one more question then. Oh, but before you do that, you should just know at the top of the. This is true of all my classes, but if you look at the top of the source sheet, my email is there. If you have a question you want to email me, please do. And in the past, students at the Drisha classes have been great, and they've taken me up on this, and they've emailed me. In certain cases, we've arranged phone calls and Zoom calls just to talk. I'm happy to do that too. So if you aren't the last question you want to follow up, just email me and we can continue the conversation. Not now. So one last question, and then we'll close for tonight, but really do feel free to email me
We
you
can
know, if
even
you
do
email me, I can
two
also
more
do my WhatsApp
questions
number.
or
That's easier.
a couple more questions or comments, I think was good.
Okay, so questions, comments, and then until Evie says we have to close for whatever next class or whatever it is, or just because we've gone long. Noah, wait, is your hand up, Noah, or just you left the hand in the corner?
No. It's hands up. So quick question. So it seems to be pretty explicit that the mitzvah that you should learn Torah and you should understand it, but then we tied in this idea of this toil, this struggle, and that itself is meaningful. Why almost maybe not, I'll ask why. Why is that implicit and not as explicit? Because as you said yourself, in the ideal, you want a person who throws himself and breaks their teeth and always is struggling to go into it. But if someone doesn't have that, then what is going to be driving them to engage at all? Why not make that a more important and explicit facet of this concept overall?
Okay, so look, I mean, look, if you look at Rabbi Lamb's article, that's really where he drives, right? He goes very much on the toil being intrinsically important. I don't want to downplay that. The only reason that I didn't play it up is because I think that what we've been talking about are the things people think about less. But I agree with you, meaning we can talk about how, even without all these added things, the process itself is important. The effort is itself important, and yeah, I mean, this comes back, I think, partially to Anne's point before, is that the very experience of Talmud Torah can engender feelings of awe and I don't even know what the word is, awe or self transcendence, and yeah, there is something about like just being lost in a text and a story and a I don't want to leave that at all. I think that's also critical. I agree with you that's also definitely part of it. And if I downplayed that, then I apologize. I don't want to downplay it. I think that both simply because part of the mitzvah is the effort, but also because experientially the effort is just is powerful, right? I don't want to downplay that. I think that's really important, and I think that it's true that I mean, this because you learned with me for a while, but that sometimes people will ask me for something, and I'll tell them where to look it up, and they'll say, "Oh, come on, just tell me, Rabbi," and I'll be like, "No, I want you to look it up. Like, I want you to go through that process." So you know that I identify with that. Maybe I didn't make it clear enough here, but I totally agree with you. I mean, it's important both because that's part of the mitzvah, but also because that's part of the experience, right? Like just thinking and sweating and just being lost in the world of Torah is itself important. If I underplay that, then here is my ode to that. There's it'll come to me, but there was a book written about this by a Christian scholar, just on it's basically an ode to the power of learning per se. But it'll come back to me what it was called. By Zena Hurt, I think was her name. I don't remember the name of the book. I'm pretty sure that she was the author though. Where she really goes through this, not from a Jewish perspective, but if you want like a non-Jewish perspective on the value of Torah Lishma or knowledge Lishma, then it's a great place to go. Okay. Evie, are we done?
Actually, I double checked. We can continue for another 12, 15 minutes if you want them.
I feel bad that I'm keeping people, but no one is running away. So whatever you want.
After the class, I double checked and we're good.
Okay. So if anyone else has comments, questions, and again, if you think of something later, don't worry about it. You can always email me. But look, for me, I really appreciate how much feedback I got, and how much participation I got, because especially in this class, considering what we're talking about, it's really important to me that you all shared what it is that the process of Talmud Torah means for you. Like, I think that's really important because it just highlights to me how important it is for us to put that out there, right? To just explain what is it that Torah means to us,
and like keep that at the front of our minds. Like, why is Torah so important to us? What are we doing? That's just so important. So I'm glad that everyone contributed, and I like some of your formulations. Like I had a general direction in terms of the identity, but I like I like the other things that I really like the other things that people experience in Talmud Torah. So that was both meaningful. It's also an illustration of what it is that Talmud Torah does, right? The fact that we can have this conversation is also evidence of the importance of that process itself, which is good. But yeah, anything else? Anyone else want to question, comment, yell at me, argue, whatever?
I want to make a quick comment. So Socrates said two things about why we should not become literate. One is de-skill our memory. I'm sorry, de-skill is a word from a different vocabulary. But the other was that you cannot have a conversation with a written text, which used to be true, but now isn't true. And I do this all the time with ChatGPT, where I've read something I don't understand. It will help me understand it, and I'll say, yeah, but that seems to not fit with this, what you just said, or how does that fit with that? And it's like talking with an incredibly smart person who sometimes hallucinates, but an incredibly smart person who is able to put things together, which is also a really important type of wisdom, I think. So I think I'm reacting to the picture of AI as you go. It's like instant Wikipedia or a Google search where you just get an answer.
Right. So I definitely agree with you saying, and as I mentioned, right, one of my colleagues, Ray Wasserman, for Noah, he'll know who that is, pointed, illustrated for this, as I said, at a PD. And I think you're right, right? You're right. AI, generative AI, is not just Wikipedia. It isn't. And yeah, Khan Academy is not using, already a year ago was not using ChatGPT 4.0, it was using 5.0, which was not released to the public. And there is an option there for students of essentially a chavruta with it. And yeah, it is extremely powerful. And it's a tool that we should use. I agree with you. I think we should use it, but keeping in mind our goals of education, right? Because right, you're right. It's not Wikipedia. It can make us think about it. As long as we are explicit to ourselves about our goals, then we can use the tools. Because if we don't, and again, I think that's why it's important to articulate what we think education is about. Because if we know what we want out of education, then we will use the tools in a way that further that goal rather than quash it. And I agree with you. A conversation with ChatGPT, and again, if you go onto Khan Academy and you set it up with you, again, it's not programmed to do Torah, but it is to do literature and things like that. It is very impressive how it can make you think, and that's great, right? As long as we realize that we're using it to make us think deeper, not to outsource our thinking to it. But yeah, it's very important to note that is the difference between generative AI and Wikipedia and Google and whatever, is that the tools are very powerful and can be used in ways that promote thought, in ways that, the way that Wikipedia couldn't. I agree with you 100%. But that only reinforces how important it is to be self-aware of what we want out of education, because then we'll use the tools right. But yeah, you're right. You're definitely right. And I do it myself. I do it with ChatGPT, and I agree with you. It's helpful. I'll say, I'll put in things I wrote, fix this up, and summarize it. And when you see it, it's like, oh, I didn't mean to say that. I wrote that, I didn't mean it. And you go back, right? That's important. Like I agree with you. But again, you have to be explicit about what you want out of it. Okay. Okay. Have we answered all questions in the world? Okay. I think well, this was great. And thank you guys for staying on extra to continue this conversation. Evie, thank you for all your help and for tolerating our overtime today.
Oh, no. I
Um,
just wanted to double check. Yeah. No one needed the account. It's all good.
okay.
Thank you so
Okay,
much.
so hope to see you next week at like I said, the next 2 weeks we're going to talk about halachic decision making.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Ziering, and thank you again to
Thank
everyone
you.
who joined us today.
Thank you, Rabbi Ziering.
Lehitraot.
Thank you. להתראות.